Ladies and gentlemen, Sean Faircloth.
Now, I'm coming down here to Florida, and I'm honored that you folks invited me to stop by. And I want to talk about the future of our movement. But first, just sort of in welcome to the state of Florida, I want to talk about some of the folks that are in my book in a chapter called The Fundamentalist 50. One of them is a member of Congress from the Orlando area, Congressman Dan Webster. Some of you may be familiar with Dan Webster. He's the one who supports a group called the Institute for Basic Life Principles, which I can give you an example of some of the principles that they believe in. One is that the wife shall be submissive. Now, I don't think it means the kind that some of you may be thinking of either. I think they mean something else, more pervasive than that. And it also says, part of their doctrine, that you wives out there shall not make any demands on the husband. So just make sure you follow instructions per the philosophy of Orlando Congressman Dan Webster. And he's in the book, in the chapter, The Fundamentalist 50. Another one, Orlando area Congress. I don't know what's in the water in Orlando, but Orlando area Congresswoman Sandy Adams. She's the one, she boasted how she fought against stem cell research when she was in the state legislature in Florida, and how she wants to teach creationism in school. She said that. And then, I like this, she was asked if she believed in evolution, and she offered this kind of tart reply. She said, "I'm a Christian. What else do you want to know?" Well, I think that kind of settles it. You know, so much for telling kids the truth with our tax money. I'm a Christian. What else do you want to know? But Congresswoman Sandy Adams, there she is, does remind us of something very important, actually. See, the religious right, I think they own a really good product. They own a brand, if you will. And that brand is the seductive simplicity of certainty. It is a really good and appealing brand. Join the in-group, and you get shelter from the storm, from the uncertainties of life. It's so comforting to feel like you are part of that anointed group. And with this brand, they've been selling for years. They've been, you got to give it to them, tremendously successful. And I document in my book how they're raking in the money, tremendously, of course, but also they have already changed the laws in the United States of America in a great variety of ways. And I'm going to give you one example of that. There was a girl named Amia White, and Amia White was 2 years old. And like most kids who were 2 years old, she went to child care. And at her child care, unfortunately, they lost track of little Amia White, and she was left alone in a van in the sun in Alabama for 2 hours. And after 2 hours, little Amia White's heart gave out, and she died alone in that van. And on the outside of the van were painted the words, Holy Church, because Amia White went to a religious child care. And I want you to picture two child cares side by side, one secular, one religious, in the state of Alabama. The secular child care has to obey food safety regulations. The secular child care has to obey medication safety regulations. They have to obey child staff ratios. They have to obey staff training with the children, and they are subject to unannounced state inspections. The religious child care is exempt from all of the health and safety laws that apply to secular child cares. And you don't need to worry, though, because the head of the Alabama Christian Coalition said, listen, the pastors in the congregations, they're our quality control. And to be fair, maybe it was a fluke. Maybe it was an anomaly. But as it turns out, there was a boy named Demyron Lindley. He was 3 years old, and he was left alone in a van in Alabama in the sun at a religious child care for 10 hours. And then he died alone in that van at a religious child care. Now, deaths are rare, but much more common is serious and rampant neglect. children left in their own feces for hours. Lots of things we don't even know about. Why? Because they don't have state inspections, so you can't even get to the religious child cares to find out what is happening to these children. Scam artists who just don't want to obey the law and just say, I'll label myself a religious child care, and then they're exempt from the laws. 13 states have some form of religious exemption from the child care laws in the states in the union, and last I checked, one of those states, by the way, was the state of Florida. You see, the seductive simplicity of certainty hasn't merely held sway over individuals. It's not just the folks attending the big box churches. It's held sway in the halls of legislatures, in Congress, and particularly that has been so in the last 3 decades. See, they've been out selling that product. They've been grabbing people by their emotions. And that is a pivotal path to political success. And meanwhile, we secularists, we're kind of a little proud, maybe sometimes a little smugly proud, because we can kind of say, well, aren't we science-based? Aren't we evidence-based in how we look at the world? And we kind of bask in the glow sometimes of our intellectual superiority. But meanwhile, let's issue congrats to the moral majority, because they were never moral, and they've never been the majority, not even close. But they are the ones who have veto power over one of 2 major political parties in the most powerful country on earth. It's never before happened in history of this country what is happening now. It is a time of maximum danger if you care about the separation of church and state, which leads to this question. If we're so smart in the secular movement, are we smart enough to try new tactics? Are we smart enough to rethink our strategy? Are we smart enough to really get in the game of saving the American Republic? It matters. It matters worldwide. Whether you live in Switzerland or Swaziland, creeping American theocracy in foreign policy and foreign aid is a danger to the entire world. But among us, our fellow secularists, it just so happens that I have a modest plan to take over the United States, and I'm hoping you'll help me out with it. There's Jimmy Stewart there, because as Lou Appignani, what he was talking about, and people of his generation, they were patriots, and this plan is a patriotic plan. It is a patriotic mission to protect our country. And I think first and foremost is reframing how secularists approach issues. Number 1, we need to demonstrate, convey the human impact of religious bias in American law. Successful advocacy isn't about statistics and statutes. We need to have statistics, we need to have data, but our success is based on stories. This guy right here had one of the most analytical minds ever in politics. He was someone who was incredibly effective. But when he was doing those fireside chats, Franklin Roosevelt wasn't talking about abstractions, he was talking to people. This didn't mean he was talking down to his audience, not at all, far from it. But he gave them the impression that he was talking to individuals, for individuals, and about individuals. Our secular advocacy has to be reframed to tell stories about how our fellow citizens, real people, are harmed by the privileging of religion in American law. Amia White, that 2-year-old girl who died in that van, it's true, in a scientific sense, if you want to look at it that way, she's merely an anecdote and nothing more. But there were thousands of children who are endangered in religious childcare. And if we can learn the story of this one little girl, then we can grow to feel for the many others who are endangered. And that is critically important. There is something of a noble flaw in how secular Americans, I think, approach an issues. And I mean it. It's noble because we believe in our ideal. We believe in our ideal of the evidence-based approach to the world, and we're right about the evidence-based approach to the world. But we also have to be smart about how we use that approach, and we must connect with the hearts of the American people and talk to them about how the American people are affected. Secular Americans have been known for opposing In God We Trust on coins. Okay. But let us now also be known for protecting children from so-called faith healers who torture their children while praising their own religiosity as they leave their children to die with the imprimatur of American law in 38 states and the federal government. Secular Americans have been known for opposing a manger in a town square, but now we must also be known for stopping fundamentalists from denying condoms and scientific education to poverty-stricken people in the most desperate corners of the world. Secular Americans, we have been known for opposing the National Day of Prayer. Now we must also be known for opposing the theocratic legal concept that religious schools, because they are religious schools, will have greater leeway to punish children physically than do non-religious schools.
Yes.
Sick. Read about Dobson if you don't know how pervasive this is and the kind of things that Dobson talks about. Secular Americans have been known for opposing under God in the pledge. Now we must be known for opposing the big con job pulled by mega ministers who live in palaces, homes subsidized by special tax loopholes that only they get and that you pay for. Secular Americans have been known for opposing a cross on public land on a hill in California. Now we must also be known for opposing textbooks that tell lies to our children with our tax money.
Yes.
We have to stand up. You know, humanist and atheist activists have been known for banging the drum of symbolism for decades, and we make a valid point, but we simply don't have enough to show for it in the real world of American politics today. We have to reframe our case. Secular Americans, we are a sleeping giant, a huge demographic that is yet to truly organize itself, much less galvanize the general population, a lot of which is sympathetic with our cause. Seculars have kind of ignored people suffering under religious privilege in law while shaking our fist at some slapped together Home Depot manger with a plastic baby Jesus at Christmas time. Now, these symbols are meaningful. I don't mean to underplay them. And they do violate Madison's Constitution, no question about it. But if we secular Americans are going to reach out to the broader population, we need to reach that human story and tell that human harm. That's how we can change the perceptions of our fellow citizens. Tell a neighbor about In God We Trust on money. Tell them about it. Then tell them about Amia White dying in that van. Which story is going to reach people's hearts? Which story is going to make your neighbors see how our cause speaks for justice in a way that they had not yet perceived? But I'm the first to say that someone like Amia White alone isn't enough. There are about 13 states that have some form of exemption regarding religious child cares, and that affects thousands and thousands of children, and it's very important. But alone, that's not enough to make our larger point, which leads me to point 2. That is, we need to convey the pervasiveness of this harm. This is something that we need to know across the way, and not something that's out in the future. It's not just when Michelle Bachmann gets elected president. I think people sometimes perceive that it's something that might happen. Right, that's the scary thing in the future. What I'm telling you is that sometimes because we get all that focus on people like Michelle Bachmann, we don't notice on the ground in politics that the religious right has decade by decade been passing laws in the legislatures, signed by governors, passed by members of Congress, a lot of times under the radar, not only of the broader American public, but sometimes under the radar for us who care about secularism. So when today I spoke about Amia White, my book tells a score of stories, all connected to real people already harmed by religious bias in American law and policy. Policy that goes on to, in fact, harm thousands upon thousands of people. I'm just going to give you a short list of some of the topics that involve religious bias in law. And then I want you to think not only about how it affects you, but also think about your neighbors. Think about your friends. Think about family members and how they might be affected by these issues, even if they are not yet convinced by our cause. So, bias in government-funded sobriety treatment. Bias, as we heard about in the United States military. Bias in children's law, faith healing, child care, vaccines, corporal punishment, access to reproductive health, sex education for our youth replaced by religious propaganda with our tax money, stem cell research thwarted, faith-based initiatives that discriminate with our tax money, voucher funding for schools that discriminate with our tax money, marriage discrimination, government funds that discriminate with giving the Boy Scouts money so they can discriminate against people who are atheists, like Brad Pitt, because he's so evil. Or gay people, like George Takei. They get to discriminate with our tax money. Religious bias imposed on land use planning and environmental law? Yes. Religious bias in public schools and textbooks. Student loans that funnel tax money to creationist colleges. Religious bias impeding end-of-life autonomy. Loopholes to permit sexism violating Title IX in religious schools. Think of each of these issues connected to stories about real people harmed. Stories you can tell your neighbors, your friends, people at work. I tried to make my book a kind of a toolkit to convey the pervasiveness of the human impact of religious bias in American policy. And when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about our fellow citizens, talking to our friends and neighbors. And I say this because, in my experience, I spearheaded over 30 laws when I was in politics. And I had a rule. I actually tried to only push for legislation that I considered substantive and evidence-based. Sounds simple, but a lot of times that is not usually followed in politics. But I wanted to know every detail of the legislation I was involved with so I could understand it and also understand the process. And after serving that time, serving a couple years as a lobbyist for my state bar association, serving as a secular lobbyist for you in Washington, D.C., those 2 decades of experience have taught me something, and it's a tough lesson. A professional lobbyist can do a wonderful job advocating for us, advocating for secular values. We can offer great logical reasoning, and it won't matter. It won't matter by itself. Politicians are influenced by 2 things: numbers of people and numbers of dollars. And secularists have not brought either of those to the table yet in significant numbers. We need to do that to affect the policy process in this country. Which leads me to number 3. We must build a policy-focused social movement that means creating a secular coalition in every single state of this union. And I'm talking about a movement that is social. And by that I don't mean, picking up dates at the Skeptics in the pub. Not there's anything wrong with that. But I'm talking about something different here. I'm talking about the skeptics groups and the Society for Humanistic Judaism and all the groups in between getting together under an umbrella of a statewide organization that doesn't replace any of the organizations but focuses on public policy, advocating to your state legislatures, advocating to your federal elected officials. You need people, a lot of people, thousands of people, standing in support of a professional lobbyist if you're going to make that lobbying really effective at all. In 2010, I proposed a state secular coalition concept, and I was honored to kick off the Secular Coalition for Arizona a year ago, and I thank Matt Schoenley and Sarah Blaine and many others in Arizona who led that at the local level. I had the same honor in Alabama, and thank Charles Miller and many others in Alabama who led that project. But we didn't purposely plan to go alphabetically. It was, I don't know. Although, I got to say, I do want to see a secular coalition in Sarah Palin's Alaska. That's for sure. I used to live in Alaska, and you know why? Because it's not Sarah Palin's Alaska. It's our Alaska. Our sense of liberation, our sense of independence is really the majority view. And if you don't believe me, you haven't been to Eastern Kentucky University. Because let me tell you, I was honored that Richard Dawkins asked me to come with him on his last tour and talk about my book. And I'll tell you, at Eastern Kentucky University, frankly, I'd never heard of the place before. And this is rural Kentucky. 2,300 people showed up to meet Richard Dawkins at that university. Now, remember, we're not talking about Seattle or Santa Barbara, where I'll be speaking with Richard Dawkins next spring. We're talking about Bible Belt, Kentucky, 2,300 people. Senator McConnell of Kentucky could not draw 2,300 people to Eastern Kentucky. No. And the thing was, these people were really excited to meet Richard Dawkins. But they were almost equally excited to meet each other. All these individuals, secular groups, here's a skeptics group, a humanist group, an atheist group, all getting to know each other. It was really a fantastic event in the so-called Bible Belt. And what I saw from a political perspective is this is a real movement, and it really is at a tipping point. And Richard Dawkins asked me, the foundation asked me to work with you on political strategy in Washington, D.C., and on grassroots organizing in every single state of the Union. And I will pledge to you, I'll use my 2 decades of experience politically, in elective office, in lobbying, in political organizing, so that we can build that grassroots structure to serve Dave, to serve all the national groups, so that we can really be a force. The way I see it, if Richard Dawkins can do this guy's a revered scientist, he lives in Britain. If he can put in that amount of time, I can put in the effort, and every single one of you can put in the effort to protect our country from its time of maximum danger of theocracy. We have to do it. This also leads me to number 4. And let's take this issue head on. How many times have you seen in this movement people unnecessarily attack each other without evidence, or attack each other personally, or use gossip and innuendo? A lot of times the blogosphere lends itself to that. And I know, it's hard with, we can't police the internet with all the trolls and all the stuff that goes on there. And social media, definitely to be encouraged. It's a great thing. So, for those of us who blog, we salute you. But let's make a pledge. When we get mad, and we sometimes get mad, and we get ready to disagree with each other, fine, that's all legitimate. But when we're about to click, when we're about to post something to thousands of people, whether it's on our blog or podcast or website, Facebook, Twittering, whatever the case may be, if it's about someone in the secular movement, if it's about someone on our team, let us do the evidence-based thing and contact that person directly first, and then give them the chance to offer evidence. That's the word. So that you might actually know before you click on something where you're saying something negative to thousands of people. It's really important for our movement. We need innovation rather than infighting in our movement. I feel like people like Dave are really leading us in that direction. We owe him a round of applause for that kind of spirit. I also think that innovation spirit is embodied by the Richard Dawkins Foundation in general, and also by our executive director, Dr. Elizabeth Cornwell, in particular. It is her consistent approach. The Richard Dawkins Foundation, we don't have membership per se, so it's kind of the nature of the organization. We kind of rise above any kind of intra-party fighting and that sort of thing, and looks to an innovation approach. How are we going to run this like a business that's going to be successful? And so we're going to be unveiling a new website with a new slogan, Innovating for a Secular World. And this new slogan really embodies, I think, where we're headed. And an example of that innovation is the OUT campaign. The OUT campaign, the red letter A, that idea came from Liz Cornwell. And thanks to her initiative, it has been a huge worldwide success. There is now a Facebook out page for Afghanistan. The Richard Dawkins Foundation is taking an entrepreneurial approach to the goals of the movement and achieving our political influence. And an investment in the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science is an investment in innovating for a secular world. Now to point 5. Achieving diversity in this movement. In 2010, I had an idea for a strategic secular summit, bringing together a diverse group of secular thinkers and activists to exchange ideas and strategize together at a summit that was held in May 2011. And before the summit, I had heard this rumor that women are 50% of the population. And so at this summit, 51%, and we had a majority of women who were at this summit, participated in this summit, and led the committees in this summit. And lo and behold, the quality of our product was higher. What do you think of that? I don't know. And what I think we're going to do with Richard Dawkins Foundation and with the Richard Dawkins website, which I'm told gets about 1 million hits a month, is really help even more with the diversity of this movement. Not because of tokenism, far from it, but because the diversity increases the quality of the product that we can produce. And so what you're going to be seeing on our new website is that we're going to have specific outreach for African American atheists, allowing them a forum, people, Latino atheists, people who are involved in the former Muslim movement, giving them an opportunity to face the unique challenges they face together and in a collaborative fashion, utilizing the Richard Dawkins Foundation website for that purpose. Next is morality, taking back the word morality. I was once scolded at an atheist gathering. Someone got up, in the question and answer session and said, "You shouldn't use the word morality. It's their word," referring to the religious right.
We have more.
And I write a chapter in my book about sex, just because. No. I write a chapter in my book about sex because who is more obsessed with sex than religious fundamentalists? The religious right has turned the word morality into a word about sexual trivia. That's really what it's become. In my parents' time, there were these giants that walked on the earth. One giant was 5'6", and his name was Martin Luther King. And another giant was 5'9", and his name was Robert Kennedy. And they used the word morality all the time. And when they used the word morality, everybody knew what it meant. It didn't have to do with sexual trivia. It had to do with the poor and the dispossessed. It had to do with, as the Greeks said, taming the savageness of man and making gentle the life of this world. Far from rejecting the term morality, secularists must convey that it is central to our positive vision of the future. The most noble human aspiration there is to have some positive impact on the lives of our fellow human beings. I mean, why are so many people right now reading Stephen King's book about the Kennedy assassination? It's almost 50 years later. Well, Garfield was assassinated. McKinley was assassinated. No, that's not what it was about. It was that this guy made us believe and act on the belief that we could change our world and we could make our world a better place. And now it's time for us. It is time for us in this room, secular Americans, to step up and to offer hope and a specific plan to change our society for the better. And I offer 10 guiding principles, a 10-point vision of a secular America. Number 1, our military shall serve and include all Americans, religious and non-religious, with no hint of bias and with no hint of fundamentalist extremism coloring our military decisions at home or abroad. Right here. Stephen Hill, remember him? A gay serviceman who was booed at that Republican Party Tea Party debate. Well, we're secular Americans. We are patriotic. Let's have a round of applause, not just for him, but for all the military. Number 2, any federal or state-funded program, whether offering services domestic or foreign, that relates to reproductive health or intimate sexual decisions shall be based upon science and public health, not based on religious bias or the denigration of women or sexual minorities. We're going to stand up for that. Number 3, healthcare professionals shall fulfill their professional oath.
Yes.
Not like in Arizona, where with the help of Arizona law, a fundamentalist pharmacist turned away a rape victim who had a valid prescription for Plan B. If they don't want to fulfill their professional oath, they can find another job.
Yeah.
There shall be no bias based on religious and land use planning or environmental law or in employment as there is now with our tax dollars. It has to stop, and we have to stand up for it. Number 5, marriage can be defined by a religion howsoever they choose within their religious services. But as to American law, there will be no bias as to the legal definition of marriage. Because after all, which is more scary? Anti-gay crusader Ted Haggard speaks out against gay sex while having gay sex on meth? Or, hey, Sulu and his husband from Star Trek, come on! When facing end-of-life decisions, all Americans shall be guaranteed control over our own bodies without being thwarted by religious bias. It's our body and it's our decision. 7, America's youth shall never be subjected to religious bias in education. If there's 1 penny of government money, there's not 1 iota of religious propaganda. We owe it to the young people of this country. We'll stand up. Number 8, the composition of our Congress and legislature shall include secular Americans, and there must be no political bias against secular candidates whatsoever. Because again, reality-based, look at what we got now. Or compared to what we could have. Bill Gates, a non-religious American who does good works. We need representation too. And whatever you call Bill Gates, I don't think you call him extreme. He's us. He's who we are. Or consider this in my chapter, The Fundamentalist 50. What we have now, Michelle Bachmann, or hey, how about this scary atheist, Brad Pitt? He kept coming back. After the hurricane in New Orleans, after so many other people forgot what happened and the plight of the people in New Orleans, Brad Pitt, an atheist, very open, keeps going back time and again himself with a hammer in hand to help people. And the people put up signs to say, let's elect Brad Pitt mayor of New Orleans. And he said, well, I can't. I'm an atheist. Well, we're going to change that because we've been leading. There shall be one consistent standard pertaining to the health and welfare of children, no matter the religion of a child's parents, school, or child care center. Religious extremists can do whatever they want to their own bodies, but children shall be treated as human beings, not some form of chattel to be sacrificed under religious ceremonies. We'll stand up for these kids every single time. Number 10, medical, technical, and scientific innovation shall be dedicated to the health and advancement of our fellow citizens and must never be impeded by religious bias. We got to stand up for this. We can do things. We can do things to help people with spinal cord injury. It's about standing up for the future of this country. So I'll work with you. Liz Cornwell will work with you. The Richard Dawkins Foundation will work with you to, 1, frame our issues in terms of human impact. Document the pervasive variety of ways that religious bias in law harms thousands upon thousands of our fellow citizens. Do the hard work to create a secular coalition in every single state of the Union. 4th, to expand the diversity of our movement, particularly utilizing the Dawkins website and our staff to work with you to do that. And then 5, offer a clear, positive, moral vision of what a secular America will be. Now, I've heard people say, Sean, I agree with the 10-point vision, but I want my broad philosophy as a humanist, atheist, agnostic, or freethinker to be fully accepted in the world, and I completely agree. But to that I also respond, let us consider how best for our philosophy not only to thrive, but to prevail, to win. I want us to win. See, there's a common thread that runs through all of the examples I've given about religious bias in American law that I've described. 1, real people are hurt. This is not an abstraction. Real people's lives are detrimentally affected to the tune of thousands upon thousands of people. 2nd, they're hurt because of some form of bias in American government or law. 3, the bias is justified by an ancient document. And this kind of reasoning is bizarre, but so pervasive that it's almost like part of the wallpaper even for us, for secular people, because it's so commonplace in our society. But to illustrate, and maybe illustrate to our neighbors how strange this is, I want us to do a little mind experiment. If I were to say to you that I have a 1,000-year-old document in my hand from Bosnia, and this ancient document allows me to take away your human rights, well, if I had this 1,000-year-old document from Bosnia and said I could take away your human rights, they would take me away to what they used to call the funny farm. But if I wave an ancient document that is 2,000 years old and add that this 2,000-year-old document is somehow supernatural, it has some kind of magic, then the politicians fall over themselves to deny human rights to our fellow citizens and to give special rights to the purveyor of this 2,000-year-old supernatural document. How bizarre is that? And that pattern with all of these laws is something that I think the average person, our friends and neighbors, will understand. The Joe Sixpacks, the soccer moms, they're good people. The vast majority of them are good, reasonable people. And when they look at the examples of Amia White and the many others, I think they are likely to say, sign me up. That matters to me. How people are harmed matters to me. The 10-point vision is part of an overall political strategy, but it conveys through and through a worldview, our worldview. You know, Christopher Hitchens, who we justly so admire and who we lost so recently, he wrote a lot, and that's one of the reasons we admire him, because he wrote so eloquently about so many topics that it's really encyclopedic, all the things he said. So it carries extra weight when Christopher Hitchens said this, and I quote, "If I could change just one thing, it would be to disassociate the idea of faith from virtue." Of all the things he said that was the thing he would most want to change. Our political strategy, our vision of a secular America, the strategy and vision I present today is inherently virtuous. It is patently virtuous. With this strategy, we take command of the moral high ground. With this strategy, we turn the tables on the other side. We're not the naysayers. The religious right, they're the ones who are forced to attack our positive and optimistic vision. Evidence guiding our conclusions and compassion guiding our actions. Look at these people. Look at the signs that they have. They market the seductive simplicity of certainty. But you know, when you look at them, really there's a brittleness to them. There's a brittleness to their worldview. And I don't feel, in the end, I don't feel angry about these kind of people. I feel compassion for them and hope that if we can help persuade a larger world, we can make a really big difference. And I think our moral vision is the one that can spark a change in society with our inclusiveness. You know, Helen Keller said that life is either a great adventure or it is nothing at all. And we're lucky because I think we happen to be at the right time in history where the secular movement is on the cusp. And if we put our full effort into it, we can dramatically change the world for the better. So I have great faith in you to make this country an even greater one. Thanks very much.